Hello, everyone. My name is Samuel Alain, Operations Consultant at Psychologists of Color, Incorporated. We just want to thank you so much for coming and joining us for our soft launch. Just a few housekeeping items. This event is in a webinar style, so please refrain from being on camera or audio during the duration of the event. If you have any questions, feel free to send questions to the chat and we will answer as much as we can during our Q&A session. So today is National Tell a Story Day, where people, communities, and brands throughout the country celebrate the art of storytelling. So what better way to celebrate today than being able to experience stories that help shape top psychologists who are passionate about their craft, industries, and communities. Today's panel is titled Finding the Power in Your Story, and it will be moderated by Dr. Jordyn Trockman, who is the founder of the Psychologists of Color Incorporated. The organization's mission is to diversify the psychologist workforce and improve mental health in communities of color through elevating people of color as they pursue careers in psychology. Our goal here today is that each of you are able to connect and be inspired by today's discussion and are moved to join our mission. Without further ado, I bring on Dr. Jordyn Trockman.
Thank you, Samuel, so much for that introduction. As Samuel mentioned, I'm Dr. Jordyn Trockman. I generally go by Dr. Jordyn, and I am the founder and president of Psychologists of Color. And I just want to thank you all so much for being with us today for our soft launch event. It's really amazing to see so many of our board members, our staff members, our interns, and those of you who are participating, who are joining us live and watching the recording later. Thank you so much for logging in and getting a piece of our stories and learning about some of the wonderful psychologists who are a member of this organization. I want to share a little bit about the why I decided to found the organization. Okay, so to date myself a little bit, in the early 2000s, I started undergrad, and at that time, we were already in the field of psychology talking about the lack of diversity within the field of mental health. And come the summer of 2020, 2 decades later, I don't know where the time went, I think the world caught on to the racial and ethnic injustices and inequalities, and it really was top of mind for so many people. And I reached out, I looked around, I wanted to find an organization that was specifically focused on racial and ethnic justice within the field of psychology and couldn't find anything, and decided there needs to be something else. There has to be a way to do more. And Psychologists of Color Inc. is what came out of that desire to do more. And here we are, almost 2 years later from our founding, with a really exciting event and a full board and staff and all kinds of programs going on. So really excited to see where we are at this point. Now I'm going to move into our panelist introductions, because today is not about me, it is about our wonderful presenters. First, we have Dr. Crystal Lee, who is the owner of LA Concierge Psychologist and the clinician coach. She's also the vice president of Psychologists of Color and a Disability Community Resource Center board member. Through her boutique group practice, Dr. Lee provides neurodiversity affirmative care for autistic adults and adult ADHDers. She also specializes in adult autism assessments, focusing on identifying autism in overlooked populations, such as communities of color and gender expansive people. We also have today Dr. Norma Keddy, who is the Associate Director of Counseling for the UCLA Center for Accessible Education and one of our Psychologists of Color board members. Her specialties include learning disabilities, ADHD, diagnostic assessment, disability among college students, and acculturation and cultural competency. Dr. Keddy has a passion for Arab American mental health and intergenerational trauma, as well as college student well-being and belonging. Next panelist will be Dr. Henry Enrique Ortiz, a Gestalt psychologist and another of our Psychologists of Color board members. Enrique specializes in working with upwardly mobile people of color, often addressing issues such as racial trauma and stress, anxiety and communication. He works with individuals and couples in his private practice, which is currently online. As a proud Latino who grew up in a working class family on the east side of Los Angeles, and the only family member of his family to attend college, Dr. Ortiz knows personally the struggles of crossing cultural and class boundaries to become a member of the middle class. And our final presenter, Dr. Tanika Gale, the owner and clinical director of Collaborative Psychology Group, APC, owner of Visionary Consulting, Inc., Chief Clinical Officer of Therapy IQ, and Clinical Coordinator, Primary Supervisor of Family Support Services, Inland Empire Ronald McDonald House, and board member of Psychologists of Color. She has advanced training in couples and family psychology with specializations in sex, intimacy, and relationships, with a special interest in treating individuals, families, couples, and intimacy issues, which include sex therapy. So some incredible presenters. Okay, so I'd love to start by asking our opening question. And we're gonna go around, and I'd like everyone to share about what inspired them to pursue a career in psychology. And Dr. Crystal Lee, I'd like to start with you.
Ooh, on the hot seat. So for me, I grew up kind of always being of the helping mindset. So I did a lot of volunteering as a kid when I was an undergrad. Went to UCLA, and they have this organization called the Community Service Commission, and I ended up heading that up, and really just, I don't know, like trying to figure out ways where I, as an individual, could impact the world in a positive way. And I majored in psychology, and then I ended up interning at UCLA's Neuropsych Hospital and just fell in love with the work there. I was working with little autistic children doing early intervention. My supervisor was a psychologist, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, this is really cool, where you can do like one-on-one individual work with someone over time and see them progress and change and grow. And it was really, really just a powerful kind of I don't know, experience for me. So that's when I decided to pursue psychology, like get a graduate degree and pursue that as a career. Yeah, so that's the short version of it.
Wonderful, thank you. And okay, so I know the order, but I should have asked this earlier. What's the right way to, I address all of you in a certain way when it's just us, but in this context, should I be using Dr. Lee, Dr. Crystal Lee, Crystal? What's the right way to be addressing you today?
I honestly don't care. I don't know if anyone has a preference.
It doesn't matter.
Whatever rolls off your tongue.
Yes. Worry about it. Okay.
Enrique is good for me.
Enrique is good for you. Fantastic. That is where I'm headed next. So perfect. Perfect. Enrique, you're now in the hot seat. Same question to you. What originally inspired you to pursue a career in psychology?
It's a long story, but you said you were dating yourself about like going to school in the early 2000s, and I think my reasoning started in the 1990s, or rather the 80s, as a 21-year-old, and who almost ended his life. And I was a young man that was really feeling kind of lost in the world. And on the day I was going to end my life, I gave myself one more opportunity to live, but on the condition that I completely changed my life. And that started the next morning. And I I grew up in a family that was working class, rarely had enough money. And more than anything, if I was going to change my life, I really wanted to have money, have my own money. And so I ended up going to school, which I thought I would never do. I didn't have a high school diploma, and I ended up going to business school, and I ended up having a software distribution company that I started with a friend of mine. It's still a good friend of mine, and we had this company in the Silicon Valley that ended up being very successful. And when I had achieved this certain amount of success, I found that as soon as money started flowing, I felt very empty inside. It was as if I had sort of gone up a bell curve, always striving. And when I hit the top, I realized that that money wasn't making me any happier than I was already. And the only thing I could think of is that I just wanted to help others. It's where I came from, and it's the parents that I had who always gave much more than they took. And I just felt like I need to just be meaningful in this world and help others in some way. And I was in a group, I was in a therapy group, and the therapist kept pulling me aside and asking me to consider doing this. I had left business. I left my company, and I had nowhere to go. I had no other skills. And she had said, why don't you just think about it? And the third time she pulled me out after a group meeting, I said, all right, I'll look into that. She told me, go to the school, and I went to admissions the next day, or on that Monday, rather. And I don't know, somehow, I'm always surprised by these things somehow I ended up in grad school, and I got accepted in grad school, and I showed up and found that I was around folks who thought like me, and they talked like me, and they cared about the things I cared about. And for the first time, I felt like I found my people. I found my people. I never thought I would. I didn't fit in business school, and since then, I feel like these are my people still, and I love the work that I get to do, and it fulfills me.
Incredible. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the vulnerability in your story. And I resonated with so much that you said. And I think for so many of us psychologists, wanting to have a career that is meaningful and isn't just about making the most money that you can make, where, we're in these helping professions. And I think so many of us are really driven by a lot of the things that you've shared. So, fantastic. Dr. Tanika Gale, I'm going to ping the same question to you. What inspired you to pursue a career in psychology?
Yeah, so I grew up on the East Coast, and I can recall as a child when my parents were going through a divorce, my mom put me into therapy to just kind of have somebody to talk to process what was going on. And while I don't remember like everything this woman and I spoke about, there was something in that interaction that just really stuck with me. And I just knew I had a place that I could talk about my feelings and what I was thinking. And I kind of had like this mentor and just this guide through this difficult period of my life. And then I remember as I got older, my mom, she's a retired nurse. And so she worked in a methadone clinic. And I just remember going to work with her and being really curious about these folks' stories, and with everything, all the walks of life, like how they all ended up on a particular substance of heroin or drugs and alcohol, and just curious about who they are, what their story is. And then I don't know, I was just always intrigued about humans and why we do what we do, and just kind of just sitting back and observing people. And so if you look back at my senior like book that says, well, what do you want to do in the future? It says either be a psychologist or a lawyer. And so when I started University of Delaware, I remember taking criminal justice and I was like, this just doesn't fit me and my personality. And then I took my first general psych class and I knew I was home. And from there, I just stayed in psychology, and then moved across country and went to a doctoral program. And kind of that's how I fell into the field.
Again, I'm resonating with what you said. I remember in high school, we had an opportunity to shadow to kind of get a sense of what careers we wanted. And I originally was shadowing an architect. And I thought that was going to be so amazing. And I was beyond bored after one day, and switched to doing something in human services. And that's really what fueled me. I want to enjoy the day to day, right? The getting to observe people and learn their lives, and scratch that itch for curiosity that I think so many of us have, just to really get to know people and their stories. Which is why this is so fun. I'm having so much fun. And Dr. Norma Keddy, same question to you. What inspired you to pursue a career in psychology?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I really quickly just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here and share my story and hear these other amazing stories. So I will say that from a very young age, I was an observer, I was a listener, I was I think similar to what Dr. Tanika said, I was kind of that kid that was like, oh, what are they thinking right now? I'd be driving in a car with my family and look at the car next to me and wonder, what was on that person's mind. And so that's kind of where my mind and my lens was always just really wanting to kind of dig into what was going on in the minds and bodies of others around me. And from, I started working at a really young age, and had all types of different jobs, and was around all types of different people early on. And that, even more so kind of sparked my curiosity in others, and the diversity of others and different types of work and things like that. I majored in psychology, but sort of as an accident in college. So I had started pre-med, and I, was on that typical pre-med route, of course, wanting to, go into a helping profession, similar to what I'm hearing in a lot of you, and thinking that was the way I wanted to do it. Had loved kids growing up and did a lot of babysitting. Started shadowing some medical doctors, and felt like that wasn't the right fit for me. I wanted to kind of be able to support people's well-being in a way that I thought was more holistic, and that didn't involve medication kind of as a first line. And that was sort of my bias at that time related to the medical field. And so, from there, I got into some work working with teenage boys in a residential facility, and the levels of trauma that I saw there, and how much I really learned to kind of understand myself and my own experience in a lot of ways during that experience. I think that was the first time I started reflecting on my own sort of balancing of my identity, being a child of immigrants, and having a home life that was very, very different than like my life at school, and learning how to fit in and adjust and kind of navigate different parts of my identity in different spaces, and how that I was also challenged in this work setting as a one of very few females working in this space, and that was another aspect of my identity that I was kind of learning to navigate. And so it really just led me directly into wanting to dig in more, really exploring identity, and acculturation and trauma were some of the first kind of real strong passion areas of mine within the field of psychology. And I jumped into grad school not really knowing what I wanted to do as a psychologist or what it meant to be a psychologist, but it has led me in some really amazing directions since then.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, I would just maybe a show of hands. How many of you felt like you jumped into graduate school in psychology, not really knowing what you were in for?
I didn't fully know.
You kind of like learn as you're going, oh, and there's this hoop and this hoop and this task and this process. It's a lot. And I think, as everyone has shared, it really is, for so many of us, kind of like a calling. We're just kind of drawn to it. And you're willing to go through so many years of school and so many unpaid or poorly paid experiences and dissertations and all the things, all the hoops, because we're just want to learn and help. And
you're re-traumatizing us.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I always say we're always trauma experts by the time we get out of graduate school. Wonderful. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I have separate questions for each of our panelists. Enrique, I'm going to start with you. You are the only member in your family to have attended college. What were some of the internal or external challenges that you might have faced when pursuing your education and career goals?
Yeah, I think I had a lot of challenges. So the family I grew up in was this, a Mexican family, and I had an alcoholic father. And, so many of our folks here are students and probably know that when you have an alcoholic in the family, that kids can be given jobs, and scapegoat is one of them. Many of us as therapists are family scapegoats, and I was one. I was my family's scapegoat. So, I was always told that I was going to be a failure in life, that I was not intelligent. And so going to school for me itself, going to college, was something I never expected to happen. Nobody ever expected it to happen. And getting in school was a necessity after I decided to change my life around. But it was hard to feel like I belonged in school. I think not until grad school did I feel like I belonged there. And so, I had a reading disability. It made it so hard. And I came from a working class family that just knew how to work. So although I was always at the bottom of my classes growing up, once I changed my mind, I was at the top of my classes. I've always been at the top of my classes. Once I decided to change things around, but that meant I worked, 2 to 3 times as hard as everybody else. And coming from a family that only worked, they just worked all the time. That's all I knew how to do. Like, I didn't really know how to rest. And I think a lot of us that come from working class families, we don't really know how to have balance, and we don't know how to rest, and we don't understand self-care so much. We just know how to just keep just pushing forward. And that's really, that's always been both, that's what's gotten me as far as I've gotten in life, but it's also been difficult because, there was, I think, particularly going to school, it was hard to be always studying, always preparing. In terms of my family being a scapegoat and deciding to go to school and getting educated, I think it was a huge betrayal to my family, to my siblings in particular, and that created quite a chasm. It was really tough on my siblings who really needed me to hold a certain position for them. So I'd say in terms of my own family, it was pretty devastating for me. And it created a chasm and an estrangement that continues. There's been some real hard points to choosing to be educated.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. I feel like I've known you. You've been on the board for a while. I hadn't heard much of that before. This is such a great experience, and thank you to our staff who helped with these questions. This is phenomenal. Thank you. Tanika, I want to move on to you for a targeted question. You hold leadership positions at incredible institutions, such as the Inland Empire Ronald McDonald House, in addition to being the owner of Collaborative Psychology Group, APC, and Visionary Consulting, Inc., and also an incredible board member for Psychologists of Color. I hope I didn't butcher any of those. As a talented woman who wears many different hats, what fuels you to serve and to help people grow and heal around you?
Oh gosh. The fuel for me, I would say, is equity, access, breaking barriers, destroying the ceiling. The fuel for me is about normalizing within Brown and Black communities, the benefit of having somebody to talk to outside of their family, and breaking or recognizing some of those unhealthy patterns that we have within our families. The fuel for me is being told no, and that I could not have or achieve. And that's kind of how I created some of my companies. So I created Visionary because I really wanted to be able to help other businesses pivot, grow, elevate, whether it's businesses where the owner is a person of color, but to have like somebody that they can identify with. And then Collaborative Psychology was birthed because I wanted people in the community to see a representation of themselves within a group practice to help normalize and eradicate the stigma of getting help. I myself kind of come from a systems perspective. And so I truly feel that when one person in the system changes, you can begin to change the system. And so that's also the fuel. And I'm a huge social justice advocate. And so that fuels me as well. And I want people to really kind of come to this place of living through their authentic self and be able to function in an optimal level and kind of stand in their truth. And so all of that fuels me to help the community be healthier, help individuals be healthier, and for people to see that there are psychologists of color and that I can have some role or be a catalyst for that is part of the fuel.
Thank you so much for sharing what fuels you. I loved it. I loved hearing about it. Okay. Crystal, were there any challenges you might have encountered when pursuing your field of expertise, especially as an Asian American woman? And what were some of the lessons that you learned from those challenges?
Yeah, great question. So I feel very lucky in that I haven't been confronted with the like huge obstacles. I feel like the subtle little things though kind of wear you down over time. I'm sure many of us can relate to that, right? Like the little subtle microaggressions and being in a space and seeing like, oh, I'm the only person in the space that looks like me, or I'm the only person of color in this space, and really feeling othered in an indirect way, right? Like, oh, do I belong here? Am I supposed to be here? Everyone else is like this and I'm like that. I'm over here. So definitely like those little things, those little obstacles, those little, I don't know, things that kind of pick away at you over time. Like, I feel like that's a lot of what I've gotten like through my education and career, right? So not as many of like the big, blatant, like super obvious racism, like that kind of stuff, but definitely a lot of like, where are you from? Implying like, I'm not from here. And I was like, oh, I was born in New York. It's like, no, where are you really from? It's like, well, here. It's like, what do you mean? And, you know, having the look on their face when it's like, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, she caught me doing something that maybe I shouldn't be doing. Like just like a lot of those kinds of experiences where, you know, it can be uncomfortable, right? Like being in a space and not seeing anyone like you and feeling like you're one of one, right? Like it's uncomfortable. It doesn't always feel like you can kind of like float into a space and belong like super easily in that way, or feel like you belong, or that maybe people don't even want you there, you know, like that can feel very uncomfortable. Which is why I'm so happy to be a part of this organization and seeing other psychologists of color and really like feeling like I belong in the space and am welcome in the space and am valued in that space. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your story. And I think I'm struck by the fact that we have created a space where psychologists of all different backgrounds, I think, can feel that they belong. I think we have one, at least for us. Let's get more people involved. Let's have everyone have a taste of that. But I hope that that is the experience that we've fostered over the last couple of years that we've been all working. I can't believe it's been that long. Madness. Oh, fantastic. And Norma, where did your passion for Arab American mental health, intergenerational trauma, and college student well-being and belonging come from?
Oh, such a big question. So I identify as Arab American. My parents immigrated to the U.S. from Lebanon at different times. My dad's family in the 70s, and then my mom with my dad in the early 80s. And the being Arab or Arab American in the U.S. It's a unique experience, as we all have unique experiences for sure. And I think I learned very early on. I had a father who was very, very, very outspoken about his culture, political beliefs, and things like that were very different than the majority of the people that we were around, and he never shied away from sharing with folks that he was Lebanese or Arab, and that as a result, he's lost jobs, we've lost friends, family friends. There's a lot of challenges experienced, and that were very apparent to me at an early age, and also just the cultural differences. I'm somebody, I'm light skinned, so I can definitely pass, and experienced a lot of like, what are you types of questions, folks like, guessing my ethnicity, and had experienced a lot of just the experience of code switching, and also the experience of having coming from a very collectivistic culture, where things are really kept in the home. What happens in the house or what happens within the family stays within the family, and if there's stress or trauma or challenges, that's all being held in. And when I became aware of that within my own family and within the families of a lot of my close friends, it became really important to me to think about how my community was getting supported. Knowing, again, becoming a psychologist and learning how few Arab American psychologists there are in the field. Also, the majority of Arab countries have been in wars at various times, and my parents grew up in war, in a civil war, and so that had a very significant impact on my upbringing. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict was very, very close to home for me throughout my life, and so intergenerational trauma, just the constant, especially when Arabs are often in the media for negative reasons because of the relationships between America and the Arab world. It's like constant re-traumatization, and the experiences of parents who have immigrated to the US, having experienced those traumas, and how they were impacting, the generation that was growing up here, was always really, really interesting to me, partly from my own experiences and that of my siblings and friends. But then, really recognizing the gap within psychological research and mental health support for folks who have had these experiences. And those were some of the personal, I guess, my personal connection and connection that impacted my passion for Arab American mental health and intergenerational trauma. And then that really for me led to recognizing that the college age is such an important age for development and identity, and sort of consolidation of all these childhood experiences, and also often the place where people who maybe didn't fit in their earlier years often find a place that they fit in, or are this is where that place of belonging or finding their own community is really, really crucial. And so that those are kind of all the pieces that kind of came together for me. So much of it, and I always wonder, as for psychologists, how much of our own personal backgrounds play a role in our the direction that we end up going in, because it's very, very personal for me, the work that I do.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing about your story. I do feel like there's been a switch when we were in grad school, or I know, I guess we were in a different, whatever. It used to be that we were encouraged not to share about ourselves, right? That we were kind of told not to disclose. Like if you were writing essays or in interviews, you weren't supposed to talk about your own personal experience at all. And I feel like that has shifted so much. Now it feels like the opposite, like it's encouraged in a lot more ways to be very open about our own backgrounds and how that shaped who we are as professionals. So I think it's a very healthy cultural shift. I'm very excited that has changed. Okay, so now I'm gonna have a question for everyone, because you are all incredible board members of Psychologists of Color. What was your reason for joining the board, and how does Psychologists of Color's mission resonate with your own personal missions? And I'm gonna call on Crystal first as our VP.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of alluded to this before earlier. Like when I heard that this organization was being created, I was so excited because I really didn't feel like there was a space for specifically psychologists of color. So really wanting to find like-minded people where we could come together and embrace our differences and our similarities and just really feel like, you know, we belong, right? We belong in the space. And for me, the mission is so important. Like I really don't want it to continue where new generations of psychologists of color come through and have the same experience of like, I am one of one in this space. And having professors who like none of them look like them or come, you know, understand their culture, or having supervisors and none of them look like them or understand their culture or you know, of cultural humility. And, you know, there's just something different when you see yourself in the profession and in your professors and supervisors, your peers, your colleagues, and then of course, like as clients, being able to access and see therapists that reflect them and their identity, like how important that is. So for me, like all of those aspects are just so crucial and important, which is why like I was really excited when this organization came to be.
Wonderful. Enrique, same question to you. What was your reason for joining the board, and how does POC's mission resonate with your own personal missions?
Well, I would say it resonates with my own mission in that I just love working with Latinx folks and people of color in general. And, you know, like Tanika, like racial justice is just so woven into who I am that like, that to be a part of an organization that was committed to doing the same thing was important to me. And I came from a family that was always sort of sending the elevator down, right? We always helped out. We had our own grassroots thing that we helped folks who were coming across the border and helped people find jobs and helped getting food and clothing and supplies. And I grew up doing that. And and I also like I grew up, like I've never really had mentors and I didn't have much guidance. And I like being able to do that for others because I think in some way it's a way I get to experience it myself. So the idea of helping other folks who are people of color and being able to guide in some way and share some of what I've learned on this path, to me is important. It gives so much meaning to who I am professionally and personally.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Tanika, same question to you. What were your reasons for joining the board, and how does POC's mission resonate with your own personal missions?
Oh gosh, it just, the mission of POC just really aligns with how I was already living my life. So part of the mission, right, is to increase racial and ethnic diversity in the psychologist workforce. And so I was like, well, I already am a supervisor of a practicum program in which I try to be that mentor. And I know as well at my company here, I have psych assistants and then people within my organization that I'm very intentional about making sure that there is, you know, diversity. And so when I saw this organization and that it was being formed, I was like, I really want to have my hand in being a part of that. As well as, you know, we know the stats for what African Americans, we're what, 4% or 4.8% African-American psychologists in the United States. And I was like, that is so not enough. And so if there are more people that can see I exist or others and kind of grease the path to make it easier and reduce the barriers by being a part of this board, why not?
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And Norma, same question to you. What were your reasons for joining the board, and how does POC's mission resonate with your own personal missions?
Yeah, I will say that I went to a graduate school that had very little diversity. And saying that, there was actually what I would consider really great diversity training, but a very minimal diversity within the faculty and the students. And I was always kind of seeking out in different conferences and things like that. And of course, within my grad program, created the minority support group with some of my peers. So I think that psychologists of color having a community is really, really important for our own well-being, for our own sanity in a lot of ways, and for our personal and professional growth, and for some of the opportunities that we know people of color don't often get in terms of mentorship, in terms of job opportunities and things like that. Just knowing that the barriers that people can come across based on their name, based on their address, various things like that. And so so being a part of a community within Psychologists of Color Inc. was something that really excited me, and also being able to give back to our upcoming psychologists, who to be able to like I heard Enrique say, to kind of provide for or to hopefully be a part of like programming efforts or events and things like that, that we didn't necessarily have, as we were up and coming, and to help, other psychologists have that community and have, a space where they can be themselves and embrace who they are, and sort of marry the personal identity with the professional identity, which I think for me was a challenge. And I think a lot of my colleagues of color, it was a challenge for them as well. So the representation, I would say was a big aspect of my interest and passion in the board.
Thank you for sharing, and thank all of you for being members of the board. There would be no organization if we didn't have our board members, and there are more. These aren't our only board members, for those of you watching, and I hope that at some point we'll get a chance to highlight all of our board members. But I'm really grateful for those of you who are on today and sharing a bit about your stories, part of this event. I have another question that I'm going to pose to everyone. What were some of the toughest challenges that each of you faced during your educational journey as an undergraduate, graduate student, or early career psychologist? And Crystal, I'm going to put you in the hot seat first again.
So I guess I kind of touched upon this before, but just, having no professors of color, like that's an issue, right? And having no supervisors of color. Like before this event, I was like reflecting back on my training and experiences, and I had like really great training, really great experiences. I loved my grad program, but I mean, there's no arguing about it. Like there was no diversity within like the upper echelons, right? So there were some other students of color. I think they my grad program in particular was mindful of having at least one person of color in each cohort. But then that also creates like a weird dynamic of like tokenism and, and just weird. But there were no professors of color. Not a single supervisor of mine was a person of color. Even within like organizations I was working in. Like, until I got to my pre-doctoral internship, I didn't see any other psychologists of color, like zip, which is quite depressing when you think about it, like going through 4 years of training and classes and just seeing no one, like nobody. So I think for me, like that was definitely like an obstacle, not like an insurmountable obstacle, nothing that like made it impossible, but it was, you know, it's something you notice and you feel, and, you know, just, it's a different vibe, I think.
Thank you for sharing. Enrique, what about for you? What are some of the toughest challenges that you faced during your educational and early career journey?
You know, I also went to school without having people of color as instructors. I went to USC for my undergrad, and I think we were under 5% Latino at the time. And those of us that were there were often in the, you know, in the sellout struggle, figuring out who's the real sellout. Well, you don't like this, and you don't eat that, and you don't speak, or you've got this accent. And that was disturbing. It was also useful. It really helped me to develop more of my own identity. But you know, and I think it's that way for a lot of us. But that was that kind of infighting amongst the small group that we were was it was a bit painful for me. In grad school, not many Latinos either. Yeah, which was a little rough. I didn't love that. And after grad school, I got my first job in a clinic, and it was a private clinic that worked mainly with Latinos. It was a workers' comp sort of clinic, and I was in a Latino area, and when I showed up to this job, I immediately experienced some pretty good old-fashioned racism. I was in a clinic, and I was the only person of color treating these Latinos, and I was also the only male clinician. And when I got there, the therapists just were in a panic. I was instantly labeled a macho Mexican therapist, and which is bizarre to me, especially if you know me. I'm like so far from that. But I was getting harassed for about 1.5 years at this job. They took my groups away from me, and they would take the room away from me, and which would be my income. I was getting paid by you know, the folks that I saw, and I went through 1.5 years of being harassed quite a bit, and by white folks, really, and yet the person in charge was a white passing Argentinian woman. And if you're Latino, you kind of know that Argentinians don't always love Mexicans, and sometimes they could be harder on us. And some of the infighting amongst different Latino groups can be really awful. It could be even more painful. And I felt I had this person who interviewed every single client I had, about 115 clients, and asked them if I'd called them stupid, if I'd yelled at them, if I'd done all these crazy things that like the whole thing was unethical. But they couldn't get one person to say I had done anything unethical. And after 1.5 years, they got tired and left me alone. So, you know, and that's not the first time, it's not the last time I experienced it in this amongst therapists. But being the only person of color and showing up in white spaces sometimes has been just, you know, fine. I miss having people of color, but there's been a couple of times that it's been a little bit traumatic.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Tanika, what about for you? What were some of the toughest challenges that you faced during your educational journey, undergrad, grad school, or as an early career psychologist?
I would reflect similar to what Crystal was stating, not seeing others like me. So at University of Delaware, sure, there were a handful of us, but I had 0 professors that were Black, African American. I remember having one, and it was right before I graduated. And then grad school was so very interesting because in my doctoral program, earlier you talked about how my specialty is families and couples. And so I was in what they call the FACE or IFC. And there was multicultural community psychology. And so it seemed like all of the most psychologists of color, like they were in that, and I was over here. And so I didn't really have relationships with them because I was in a different emphasis area, and our classes didn't mix. And so I felt even more alone in grad school. And it wasn't until I had one, and I'm going to name drop, her name is Dr. Kamea Shorter-Gooden, and she wrote Shifting, and she was my dissertation chair, and she gave me the book. And from her, just like having her and talking to her, and but it just really just feeling lonely throughout this journey, and then graduating, right? And okay, now I got to figure out, how do we get licensed? What's that process? How do you do a postdoc? Where do you apply? This whole financial piece of it, and needing to work and make money. Yeah, those were probably the challenges.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'm remembering that when I first looked at the questions that were prepared for this, that was originally written as the challenges you faced as an undergraduate or graduate student. And I said, you need to add or as an early career psychologist, because that is a really hard phase.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of individuals are looking for support. It's you're not done when you get the degree. Then you still have to figure out how to function in this career. And I think in a lot of ways with less support than you have when you're linked to your graduate institution.
Kamea, Dr. Shorter-Gooden, is that like my biggest influence?
She's amazing.
If our PR and marketing team can take note of that, that sounds collaborate at some point. Okay, noted. Fantastic. And Norma, same question for you. What were some of the toughest challenges you faced during your educational journey? Could be undergrad, grad, or as an early career psychologist.
Yeah, so maybe the couple things that I'll make mention of. One would be, I think the financial challenges in terms of, not coming from, a family where, who could support me financially through college or grad school. I was, working throughout undergrad and graduate school, and, dealing with like car issues. And if my car broke down, trying to figure out public transportation to get to school and to classes. And, some of these things were experiences that many of my peers, especially at the graduate level, where there's a lot of privilege, to be at our level, at this level, and a lot of economic privilege, really. It was just a very rare, I think, experience among my peers. And asking, I had a classmate who lived near me, and it was so interesting that, she would give me a ride to classes sometimes. And then in our diversity class in grad school, and when we had a day talking about, poverty and folks who are economically disadvantaged. And she kind of gave me a shout out in that space with my cohort, to say that she had never known, some of the challenges that, people from lower SES backgrounds face, especially in these spaces where, grad school is hard enough, and, managing through some of those other challenges. The other thing I'll make mention of real quick is just, I imagine that you all have maybe had similar experiences, but in grad school, learning about, cross-cultural therapy or cross-cultural services. And it was always taught from the perspective of, being a white clinician working with a person of color or with a person from a different background. And, it's just like it's a mind game then, trying to think about how do I adjust what I'm learning right now to fit who I am and my identity, and the situations that I'm going to face that I, don't have any real mentorship around, talking through what some of those experiences might be. So just trying to, I think in a lot of ways, carving my own path throughout graduate school, and yeah, figuring it out. So I can say that there was a lot of resilience, I think, that came out of some of those challenges. And also, they were definitely challenges.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing about those. And yeah, I liked the word that you used, carving out your own path. It really, I feel that the difficulty and the challenge that comes through that when you're the first to do it, or the first person to do something, it is that much more challenging versus having a mentor or a guide, or looking up to someone who's been there, done that. It doesn't feel like carving anymore. It just feels like walking. I don't know, something with less less bite to it. Okay, one more question for everyone. What change do you hope to see in the field of psychology, and why? And Crystal, I'll have you go first again.
So, it'd be amazing if there weren't even like a need to have an organization that's focused just on diversifying the psychologist workforce, because it would be diverse. It would have already happened. It would be like a natural thing. And we could just shift focus to supporting people like on their journeys, versus like, I feel like we're fighting an uphill battle, so to speak, so ideally, like that's what I'm hoping for the future, where, we can shift our focus to just support versus like trying to force our way through and like carve out paths for people and knock down obstacles, or try to help people find work around these obstacles and all of that. Like, that'd be amazing.
Well said. Thank you. Enrique, same question for you. What change do you hope to see in the field of psychology, and why?
I would like to see more people of color in the field of psychology. And I'd like to see us doing more of the kind of work that we want to do. I think there's too many of us working in low fee or low pay centers and DMH, and I think it can be harder for a person of color to have a minority owned business, and that includes a therapy practice. You can have a niche that makes up for that, for being a person of color, but I feel like I want to see us get paid at least as much as our white counterparts get paid. I think we bring so much to the table. I think it was somebody was, or I think maybe Tanika, you were talking about, that so many of us come from collectivist cultures, and I think that our mindsets are so useful, they're so important, and they're so needed, not just for clients of color, but for white folks. I think white folks need to learn to be more collectivistic, learning to put others put others, seeing the importance of others as much, or at least as much as themselves, looking out for others. I think it's just more humane and it's mentally more healthy. So I'd like to see more of us doing the work we want to do, getting paid well. As a person of color, I'm offered a lot of free volunteer stuff. I was asked to do something yesterday, but I get offered to do, can I do low fee work? Can I do free stuff? I have someone else asking me early last week to supervise and to do that, because they want that multicultural perspective. They want someone who knows the kind of things that we understand as people of color. And they want us to teach white folks and to teach non-white folks, but they don't want to pay us so often. I want to see that change. I want to see us refusing to do those kinds of things until we're getting paid fairly, and for us to own that for ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you. Tanika, same question. What change do you hope to see in the field of psychology, and why?
I think there needs to be lots of change in our field. I want to stop going to conferences and seeing all white men and white women as presenters. I want for the field to, because when you think of all of the major theorists, right, they're all predominantly white, and the theories are all, for white folks. And it's time for that to change. I want the decolonization of therapy to be more prevalent and it be okay and accepted. I'm not a fan of the word cultural competency. I think that's just a word versus being authentic and true. Yeah, I really think that this field, I think the field in and of itself is racist as well. And so I want that to change.
Our history is, I'm remembering I had one of our original interns read a book on racism within the field of psychology, because there's multiple full books just about that history, and that is a profession that we've entered, and it has the history that it has, and we are where we are now, which is definitely not done, definitely not done. But I hope that the work that we're all doing is kind of bending the arc towards justice, right? Getting us closer to where we would want to be within the field. Norma, same question. What change do you hope to see in the field of psychology, and why?
You sort of led me to you led into what I was about to share. I think one of the big things that I think about a lot is just sort of like activism within the field of psychology, and how, thinking about how we can have a broader impact. There's so much, and I was leading to that because I was thinking about the, I think it was back in the fall that APA put out an apology related to, the role that APA played in promoting and not challenging racism and whatnot. And yeah, like you said, that's the history of the field. And I think we can't just do nothing and expect it to change. And so, thinking about how we can have a broader impact, we have, there's so much good research that's being done. How do we disseminate that research? How do we impact policy? How do we, I'm not even sure right now who the leadership of APA is, but I am wondering, how do we put or make sure there's people in some of those positions that can have, you know, a top-down impact on the field and on, you know, the broader community. So I guess, you know, thinking about that, just really, how do we have a bigger impact given the knowledge and awareness, you know, that is within our field.
And I don't know if everyone has been following, but the incoming APA president is a psychologist of color, Dr. Thelma Bryant, and I'm very excited to see what may come or how we'll be able to partner or collaborate with APA. I feel like that her being elected and kind of moving in probably opens some doors for all kinds of good things. I'm hoping. So if she's watching, hi, we're excited to to collaborate with you. I hope at some point she does watch this. Fantastic. And I think, Samuel, is it time for me to hand it back over? You're going to be the one doing the Q&A portion. Am I getting that right?
Yes, I will. But Dr. Jordyn, I believe that you have to answer the question, that last question. Would love to hear from you.
Oh, what change do I hope to see in the field of psychology? Oh, put me on the spot. Oh, so many, so many. I mean, obviously, I founded this organization with the mission of increasing diversity within the field of psychology. So that is really the main thing is I'm wanting to do. But I feel like the reason that I'm wanting to increase diversity within the field of psychology is so that we can have psychology be more accessible to all people, right? As so many of you mentioned, that there can be this barrier in accessing care if you're not seeing a mental health provider or a group practice or agency that looks like you, that gets you where you feel a sense of belonging, where you feel safe. And I think that by increasing the diversity of the psychologist workforce, we can have a tremendous impact for mental health of people of all different backgrounds. So many, lots of things, but I'll stick with that one because I could probably talk for, give me an hour-long presentation on just that, and I'll do it next time or a future presentation.
Well, before we open, thank you so much, Dr. Jordyn. Before we open it up to questions, if you can, let's just everyone just take an intentional deep breath. Let's do 3 of those and breathe out. 1 more, 2 more times. 1. And the last one. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Crystal, Dr. Tanika, Dr. Norma, and Dr. Jordyn for saying yes to increasing the racial and ethnic diversity of the psychologist workforce. This has been so enriching, and we really appreciate you taking the time and saying yes. Now we want to wrap at 6:50 to close out, but we want to open it up to a few questions. So if you have any questions, you could just put your questions in the chat and I will read it off. Currently, we have 2 questions that's in. One is from Catherine Wang. It's directed towards Dr. Enrique, but any one of the psychologists can answer as well. Catherine says she was wondering if there was any stigma or taboo from your parents when you said you wanted to pursue psychotherapy. And she commented, as someone who is Asian American, talking about mental health in my household can definitely be tough.
That question was for me?
Yes. You could lead it. Any of the psychologists could respond and answer as well.
Yeah. I don't, studying psychology wasn't so much of an issue in my family because they didn't really know what I was studying. They didn't really, I studied business and they didn't know that. And I studied psychology. They knew I was in school. They didn't actually quite know what I had been studying. So that part wasn't so much an issue. I think it had an effect on my siblings because they did know what that was. And I think some folks feel intimidated when they're in front of a psychologist. They think that we've got some magical powers. And my siblings thought that somehow maybe I had gotten a hand up. You know, I figured something out that I shouldn't. So I'd say to my siblings, it was a concern. It was fodder for more of their anger.
Dr. Crystal, Dr. Nama, Dr. Tanika, Dr. Jordyn, would you like to answer that question?
I mean, definitely, I think in many communities of color, there's huge stigma when it comes to mental health, therapy specifically. Kind of speaking to what Norma had said earlier, right? Like in certain cultures, Asian cultures as well, like we keep things private, keep it in the family. We don't talk about our problems with other people. It brings shame on the family, you know? So the thought of, you know, talking about your deepest, darkest secrets or family conflicts or family dynamics with a stranger, a therapist, like that can be very threatening to a family system. So definitely like that's something like I've seen in many different Asian cultures, and I'm sure all of us have seen in our respective cultures as well.
Yeah, I would just add to that as well that the stigma is, you know, within the Black community is only crazy people go and talk to a therapist, or that's what the church is for. And I remember, I would say it was about 5 years ago, I did a series of presentation to Black churches, and I titled it "When Prayer Is Not Enough," because I really wanted to hone in that going to therapy, it doesn't make one less of a Christian, or just because they're suffering from depression or anxiety doesn't mean that they don't believe in God and that this is some curse or some sort. And so it's more, while my mom was okay with me going to therapy because she put me in when I was younger, it was more about the community. And that's not something that we're supposed to do.
Well, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Nama.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say I relate to so much of what you all have said. I think for me, there was partly I was going to be a doctor, and whatever kind of doctor that was going to be great. And so there was a lot of stigma for sure related to mental health and needing support, but a little bit less stigma related to being the one providing the support. Because I think very much like within my culture, there's a very kind of medicalized model of mental health and disease, and so to be the one helping was a little bit less stigmatized, but entering the field was I would say to this day I don't think my parents know that I went to therapy while I was in grad school. I felt like I needed that support. And as a psychologist who, within my family can't talk about the fact that I went to therapy, that's one of those challenging things.
Well, thank you so much. We have our final question, but it's like a 3-part question. From Danica, says, do you think or know if you've made an impact in your careers? Do you want to do more? And if so, what are your plans? And I can read one more time for all the psychologists. Do you think or know if you've made an impact in your careers? Do you want to do more? And if so, what are your plans?
I mean, I hope I made an impact. Maybe that's like the self-critic in me is like, I can't definitively claim that I've made impact. Like, I really, really hope that I've made impact. I've heard people tell me that I've made an impact. So, yeah, and just my personality, like I always want to do more. Like what I'm doing now is never enough, right? Like you hit a plateau and you're like, okay, then what's the next challenge? And then you go to that next plateau and you're like, okay, and then what's the next thing I can do? And you just I feel like so many of us on this board can relate to that. It's like, what's the next thing I can do? What more can I do? And more and more and more. And like, I don't know if we're ever satisfied with like the status quo. Like there's always things that can be improved upon and changed and done better. So yeah, I don't have any like concrete plans besides knowing that there's definitely more to be done.
I think it's part of being in the helping professions or be trained to psychologists that we are great at setting goals, and we are great at helping people meet those goals and then setting new goals and just continuing to grow and grow. And so, yeah, that was my thought too. Like, we'll always want to do more. That's just kind of how we're programmed. It's not like, okay, I helped someone and I'm done. Let me sit now. It's always about what's next, right? For our clients, for our businesses, for our nonprofit organizations, or whatever, our families, whatever we have going on in our lives. I think we're just very, very goal oriented. There'll always be more.
I think there's days I felt more effective and other days where I felt less effective as a therapist. And I always hope that I make more impact than mistakes. But I would say I do feel like I've made an impact, and there's a feeling that you get when you there's a feeling you get when you are helping folks. When you're listening to somebody, and therapy is so layered, but at the foundation, when you're listening to somebody and really getting what they're saying, and you get how bad it can be, and you believe, and a person feels believed, especially a person of color that has experienced racial trauma, that you believe them. You've been there, like you understand what this experience is like. You understand the way they talk. As Latinos, we tend to be more circular. We don't get right to the point. And if you're from the same culture, you're Latino, like you understand how that works. And when people get to tell their stories and they look at you and you see they take that sigh of relief, like you see that comfort take place. And I think that's rare. I think that so many of us go through life without it. And when you get it, it's precious, and it gives you a foothold in life to make great strides. And so I feel like I get to have that experience enough times that I believe deeply that I make an impact. I'm always trying to learn as well. And I was working on some of it today, on some of the new things that I want to do a lot more study, more rigorous study of. And I have a program that I'm wanting to start developing that I want to bring out as well, a program that hasn't been done before, but I'm not really saying what it is yet. but yes, I'm always working on something. I never stop.
Gosh, do I feel I've made an impact? I do. Honestly, I do. I feel, when I look out into the waiting room and I see a very diverse, group of clients sitting out there, I feel okay. I've made an impact in helping to normalize and opening the doors that more people are coming through. I feel I'm making an impact in supervision with students. I feel, my company has about, I don't know, there might be 40 some of us. And so it's an anti-racist company. And so we are challenging diagnoses that we give. And I feel that I am making an impact thereof. If a Black male comes in and he's talking about something, not to be so quick to think that they're paranoid or that they're schizophrenic or something else, but really taking into the community that maybe they grew up in and normalizing that, yeah, maybe they are really being followed and it's not, they are paranoid about that. And so I feel, yes, I'm making an impact in helping the people here within my company just think a little bit differently. So yeah, do I want to do more? Always. Do we have goals? Yes. Was I crazy enough to apply to law school and get in? Yes. Am I going to do that with everything else? It's hard for me to say no, but yeah, we will see.
Congratulations.
Wow.
Yeah, accomplishment.
Back to school.
Right. We love school. I feel like to become a psychologist, you have to love school and you have to love growing and you have to love always doing more. And
lifelong learners, right? Yeah.
I will say for me, the fuel for that was, with all of the social justice things that are happening, and I have 2 boys, Black boys, and my heart got broken at a point, and I personally I knew I needed to do more than being a psychologist. And that was sort of the fuel of like, okay, if I am a social justice attorney, what does that look like? Or can a psychologist be political in that sense? Or do you risk losing your license? Like, these are all of the things that I think as people of color, or we think about, especially when we are involved in advocacy and navigating the board of psych and all of that too. So yeah, I think I'm making an impact.
Yeah, and I'll share really, sorry. I loved how the question was phrased. Do I think or no? I think so. But I want to say that I believe I've made an impact in my career. I'm pretty fairly early career, but I have a couple different types of jobs that I do, and one of them is in private practice and one of them is working in education. And I think it allows me to kind of diversify the type of impact that I have, and that's pretty exciting for me. And in a lot of ways, like my assessment work was really like motivated by recognizing the barriers to assessment among certain populations, particularly racial and ethnic minorities and folks from lower SES backgrounds. And then the work that I'm doing in education is supporting students with disabilities. And so, definitely work that's connected and allows for different type of impact and at different levels. I absolutely want to do more. I know one of the things that I really want to do in the future is supervision, because I think that there's a lot of value in, I would have loved to have any of you as supervisors. Not that there's a big enough age gap or anything like that, but just the lens that I hear in this space is I think it's just such a valuable lens to take forward to other psychologists in training. So I know that's one of the things that I hope to do in the future.
I could talk for a very long time about, do you want to do more and do you have any plans? Because Psychologists of Color has a lot of plans and we want to do a lot more, but you'll have to stay tuned for, for future presentations to learn more about all the programs we're wanting to launch. Yeah.
Coming soon.
Coming soon, yeah.
So we have a few more questions that came in. But what we're going to do, we have a robust strategic, like social media strategic plan. So we're going to take the rest of those questions and we're going to respond. We're going to answer those questions like through like social media and LinkedIn. So it's brings me to my next point to follow us. But before I get to that point, I want to just say thank you to everyone for coming and celebrating this special moment with Psychologists of Color Incorporated. This is our soft launch. So we're open for business. Look out, follow us on our Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We have an official launch that's coming soon. And we want to invite you to be a part of our mission. So we're going to post the links to all of our socials so that you could make sure follow us. The organization exists for you. It exists just so the passions of the psychologists that spoke. There are so many more psychologists that are on the board that really want to see this work and this mission go forward. So thank you so much for being here. Share with a friend, be a part of our mission. Thank you. Have a good evening.